Welcome to the Simpro Asset Maintenance Planner webinar. My name is David Mears, and I'm a Principal Implementation Consultant here at Simpro Software. I will be the facilitator for this webinar, which is designed to give a more detailed and in-depth look at not only the features of Maintenance Planner, but also the initial setup work required to utilize Maintenance Planner and its advanced features properly. That being said, feel free to stop, pause, rewind, and fast forward as much as you need. At the end of this video, we'll provide a few more help resources should they be needed. Our agenda for today is going to cover all of Maintenance Planner. We'll begin with the benefits of utilizing Maintenance Planner. We'll then jump into the setup components. This will include the system setup area, creating our pre-builds to use with Maintenance Planner, our asset templates, adding in our service levels, failure points, and recommendations, creating our customer contracts, and finally creating our actual assets. We'll then jump into the Maintenance Planner workflow so we can see how it all functions, and that will include creating jobs, how the field guys will interact with it via Simpro Mobile, and then coming back into the office to do job closeout, which will include the idea of billing. The last bit we will talk about before we wrap up is going to be our Maintenance Planner reports. Maintenance Planner is an add-on that increases Simpro Premium's power and efficiency in asset management. It is a robust offering that adds many features, big and small. Some direct benefits include multiple service levels per asset. This makes it easier to track not only differing service levels on the same asset, think of quarterly spot check versus annual in-depth inspection of a security system, but also allows for different service frequencies on the same asset for different customers. Some may prefer or require monthly checks, while others are okay with a semi-annual check or just their yearly inspection. Another benefit is test readings per service level. To use the example above, on a quarterly spot check, the field technician doesn't need to see the extra 20 questions that only pertain to the annual inspection. This enhancement allows you to streamline the test readings and questions that the technician fills out on each visit. Another benefit is going to be the addition of failure points, recommendations, and charge rates. We dive a bit more into these later, but essentially this allows the technicians to easily record what caused the asset to fail the inspection, provide pattern recommendations for rectifying the failure, and associate billable amounts to them to expedite the process of providing a quote to rectify any asset failures. Another of our enhancements will be actual enhanced customer contract capabilities. While customer contracts already exist in Simpro Premium, Maintenance Planner adds more capabilities, such as automatic inflation adjustments and unique charge rates per service level per contract. Contracts also now tied directly to the asset, not just the site, making it much easier to have multiple contracts against a customer and a site should different assets be tied to different contracts. Another major benefit is the new Maintenance Planner module within the utilities. This module will help improve the efficiency of your asset management workflows, as it will now replace recurring jobs as your one centralized location where the workflows begin. Last big change we will notice with Maintenance Planner is the addition of Maintenance Planner reports, including one, as we will see later, that can be made available to our customers via the customer portal. As we see each of these areas in action, there will be more detail about their functionality and uses. But before we can use Maintenance Planner, we have to do some setup work. First, though, let's take a look at the setup that potentially goes into utilizing Maintenance Planner. This flowchart shows our recommended configuration path when setting up Maintenance Planner. We will notice that all the paths lead to assets, since Maintenance Planner truly centers around asset management. The core configuration revolves around service levels, our asset templates, customers, and sites. These all have solid arrows to indicate that they're the minimum necessary components that need to be configured in Simpro when utilizing Maintenance Planner. The dotted line arrows flowing to and from our pre-builds, recommendations, failure points, and our contracts all indicate that these areas aren't mandatory, but are useful components within the Maintenance Planner. Once again, take note that the path this flowchart follows is our recommended order for the efficient configuration of Maintenance Planner. This is also the order in which we will go through the setup process during this webinar. So let's get started. The first components of maintenance planner configuration that we will address are in the system setup area of Simpro. This is where we'll find a few new configuration options that we want to address. But first, we need to make sure we have access to everything, so we want to update our Simpro security group settings. Drill down into whichever security group is the admin or all security group. Under the Actions tab, we will want to go to our Customer Assets sub-tab, and we will notice we have the option to View Maintenance Planner. This will give us access to our Maintenance Planner module and our utilities. We will also notice that we have access to give the permission to add or remove service levels. This will make a bit more sense a little later, but we will ensure it is checked and note that it is here should we need to make any changes later. We also want to ensure we have access to the Maintenance Planner reports. This can be found in our Reports tab. And we scroll down a bit and we will see our Maintenance Planner reports. Once we've checked all the appropriate permissions, we save and finish. Now that we have access to everything, let's dive into the additional system settings that will control the framework of Maintenance Planner within the Simpro environment. The first couple of additions can be found under the Default tab in our System Setup. So Defaults, and right here under our Systems sub-tab. If we scroll down our page a little and look to our right-hand column, we will notice we have 3 new options here. The first is Lock Maintenance Planner Jobs on Creation. This will control whether jobs that are created through Maintenance Planner are left open and editable, meaning changes to that job can affect the billable amount, or if they are locked so that any changes don't affect the billables. Which option we choose will likely depend on how we plan to bill clients. We will discuss this in more detail later, but a good rule of thumb for now is if the services are a set price per service or billed on a schedule that differs from the job frequency, we'll want the jobs to be locked. So that would be our yes. If the actions of our technicians determine the billable amount, we will likely want the job to be unlocked, which is our no. Again, we can adjust this later should we need to. The next option we will discuss is Maintenance Planner job descriptions and whether they are going to be detailed or a summary. When creating a job in Maintenance Planner, the system automates the basics of the description creation process. Detailed means the system will add the asset number, asset type, service level, and service due date for every asset that is associated with that job. The summary version will simply tell you how many of each asset type is associated with the job and the service level for the job as a whole. Many factors go into which option is selected, but often the sheer number of assets on a job can be a quick guide. Fewer assets per job, detailed may be better. It still doesn't take up as much space and provides a good amount of detailed information. A lot of assets per job, summary may be better as it eliminates a long description, and that takes up space and potentially leads to some confusion. Either way, we can still come back and adjust this afterwards, so remember, it's not set in stone. Our last option is Save Maintenance Planner Descriptions to, and we'll see our 3 options here are Overview, Cost Center, and None. The last one, None, is the one that probably makes the most sense, meaning it won't save the description anywhere. You'll want to keep this in mind when thinking of the second setting that we just discussed, as None would make the detailed or summary option null and void. To get a sense of the difference between Overview and Cost Center, let's think of a project job that has multiple cost centers nestled under it. The cost center level would put the description under a single cost center, meaning it wouldn't be visible to any of the other cost centers. The Overview puts the description at the highest level of the job, meaning it would be seen across all of the cost centers. So make our selections, and once we've made them, as usual, let's not forget to save. The final area in the system setup menu we're going to discuss revolves around status codes and automatic triggers. So we'll want to go back to our system setup tab and then our status codes. When creating new status codes related to Maintenance Planner, we'll want to keep 2 portions of our workflow in mind, and that's our Maintenance Planner job creation process and the Simpro mobile job submission process. For the job creation portion, there's a new automatic trigger specifically designed for maintenance planner jobs. So if I click into my automatic triggers and scroll down under our jobs, we will see this job has been created from the maintenance planner. This is our new automatic trigger. We will likely want to make an actual status for this to be able to assign here so that any job we create with our maintenance planner automatically assign that status. So to create that status, we go back to our status codes. We click on the actual status codes here, and we will create our status code. So we will give it a name, something similar to whatever nomenclature you are currently using so that it makes sense and fits within your workflow. So I'll do our MP maintenance planner. The color, you all again get to choose something that's going to be along the lines of what you're using currently or fits within your color scheme. For me, that is a purple. We'll create the status. And then we want to make sure that we move our status into the correct position within our workflow. So about where would it go? So obviously, as we create new service jobs, new install jobs, maintenance planner jobs, they're the beginning of those workflows. We have that. And the last step in this process for our premium side status codes is we want to now associate that status code to our automatic trigger. We go back to our automatic trigger. We find it. Here's our new maintenance planner job. And then again, we save. As far as the mobile submission status codes, they can be a little more in-depth as they require 2 layers. So if we're creating some, in this example, we'll say a mobile status for non-critical defect found and a mobile status for critical defect found. We'll first need to create them here in our status codes under premium. So we go back to our status codes and we would have created them and added them here. We can see I've added them both already. Now we need to actually associate them to the status codes on the mobile side. So those can be found under our mobile tab. And then we go to our statuses sub-tab. And we'll see I've already created our non-critical failure. So we'll go through creating the critical failure so we can walk through it. So we create our job status. Again, we give it a name. Following along the lines of our typical nomenclature. We'll want to make sure it is a stop status. This is something they should be picking and letting us know as the job ends in the mobile app. We pick our color. I am very fond of reds, letting me know something is critically wrong and I need to pay attention. We select our Simpro status, which is going to be the same one that we created on our Simpro premium status codes. So we'll scroll down and we'll find our critical defect found. In our job stage, typically this may be completed, but whichever stage fits within our normal workflow. And then we save our job. Now, while we aren't completely done with our system setup menu, we do have a few other components to create before we can jump back in and properly configure the rest. So let's go do those now. Now that we've covered the foundations of our system setup configuration, we'll jump in and configuring all the components and pieces that will be utilized in Maintenance Planner. If you recall our flowchart, remember there was a series of solid arrows and dashed arrows. The solid arrows noted the mandatory setup components, which were service levels, asset templates, customers, sites, and of course the assets themselves. This walkthrough, though, will guide us through a complete setup, so it's going to include the dashed arrows. That will include our pre-builds, failure points, recommendations, and even our contracts. That being said, we want to proceed according to the best practices for setting up our maintenance planner, and we start with our pre-builds. So those are going to be down in our materials module, and here we see our pre-builds. Hopefully by now we know what a pre-build is, but to kind of backtrack and go over it, a pre-build in essence is a bucket that can combine materials and or labor or neither into a singular billable item to appear on quotes, jobs, or invoices. For our purposes, we can utilize pre-builds to house the estimated materials, labor, the cost associated with those, and the standard charge rates for either our different maintenance or scheduled services that we're going to provide, for our failure points, or for the recommended fixes for those failure points. So our first step is obviously creating our pre-builds. So again, we're going to dive into our pre-builds here. So again, we're going to dive into our pre-builds here. And the first thing we really want to think about is how we're going to organize our pre-builds. We want that organization to be something that is obvious so that we can find everything we need to find. So this will vary from organization to organization, but again, should provide a clear and organized way to locate the appropriate pre-builds to assign to those quotes or those jobs or those invoices. But in this instance, to assign them to the assets or to the service levels or the failure point or the recommendations. So we'll want to build this organization out in our head before we start creating them. In ours, you can see we already have our maintenance planner pre-built. If I click into that, we'll see our subfolders that are created for our service levels, our failure points, and our recommendations. So our first subfolder is service levels. The pre-builds we add here will be used to add charge rates to the service levels for the different services that are being provided. So let's say I bill $250 for an annual AC tune-up. I would create a pre-build for my annual AC tune-up in here. So we'll walk through that process. I go create pre-build. We give our pre-build a name. Now we want to make sure that this is a customer-facing name because it will appear when they look at their invoice if we create our invoice from this actual job created from the maintenance planner. I'm going to put the demo in there just to make it easier for us to find this at a later point. Now we want to determine if there are any estimated materials related to this service. For example, our annual tune-up comes with a filter replacement. So let's add our filter. Going into my catalog, locating my filters. We're going to throw a HEPA filter on there. We'll pick our size. One filter, we will add our item. Next, we need to determine if we want to track any of the estimated labor or labor costs related to this service. If so, we head back to our details tab to make sure that the amount is populated. So our details. If there was a amount of labor associated with that catalog item, we would see it put here right now. If not, we can actually go in and add that labor time. This can be important later during one of our reports. So if we want to make sure we're estimating our labor for forecasting purposes, we would put that labor in here. So let's say our tune-up just takes us 60 minutes. The last thing we want to make sure is correct is the billable amount for this service. If we're using our standard price pre-built, which we are, we will notice that it's using our markup to determine what the actual price of this item is going to be. So currently it's $86.67. However, if we recall, our annual tune-up goes for $250. So I want to make that adjustment and get the right billable. So I can if I simply click on my flat rate price here, and I make my adjustment under my sell price to make sure it is $250 for the sell price. Once we have all of our components in there, we hit our save and finish. And now we set up our pre-build for our annual AC unit inspection at a price tag of $250, as we can see down here. Any other pre-builds related to an asset being serviced would be created and stored here for later. The pre-build we set up for the next two groups, though, will differ in one key way. They won't impact the job's billables, but rather are used to create a quote for the rectification of any issues that were found during the maintenance planner job process. Essentially, when the technician goes to do the annual inspection, the service level pre-build controls how much the service will cost. So in our instance, it would be a $250 service. If the AC unit fails the checkup and we need to provide them with a quote for potential ways to fix the unit, the failure point and recommendation pre-builds will determine the estimated materials, labor, and charge rates that will be applied to that quote. While these failure points and recommendations are created during our asset template creation process, we still want to create the pre-builds for those here before we do that point, before we get to that point, so we can associate them at that time. We also need to take a look at how we plan to structure our rectification process. So before we start building out our pre-builds for our failure points and our recommendations, we want to know how we're going to utilize them. So we'll want to take a look at that. Are we simply going to stop at the failure point? So let's say this AC unit fails. Fixing it, we just want to charge a $400 flat rate. In that instance, I could just stop at my failure points and make a very quick generic failure point. Boom, easy. That'd be scenario one. Maybe in scenario two, we want a few generic failure points. So the unit could fail, but maybe it has no power, or the fan or the coil was broken. Maybe it didn't pass a blower test, or the coolant was low. We may have different materials or labor or charge rates associated with each, so we want to track them separately so we can create maybe some generic failure points that we'll utilize to get our charge rates and get those failure points set up. In a third scenario, maybe we want to have a few generic points and some generic recommendations to get even more detailed. The unit could fail because, again, it has no power, the fan or the coil was broken, it didn't pass the blower test, or the coolant was low. Well, the blower test could mean it's an obstruction in the ducts, or maybe the duct was just collapsed, or somehow it's not connected for any reason. The low coolant could mean we need to replace it or top it up, but as we know, there's different types of coolant. So those may come with different costs, different material levels that we want to utilize, and we want to keep track of that. So we could use that with the failure points and the recommendations to track all of that. So figuring out our plan of how we want to utilize our failure points and recommendations is probably your first step before you even create those. Now, last thing we kind of want to, not the last thing, but we also want to keep in mind that the system doesn't force you to select only one failure point or recommendation. So if you build your system out to be a bit more detailed, your unit could be low on coolant and not pass the blower test. So we're able to select within Maintenance Planner both of those options. So if those are both failure points, we could select both of those as failure points. If they both come with recommendations, we could select recommendations for both. We could select multiple recommendations under one. So under the coolant, they may have 3 different systems, and we're telling it, hey, it needs these 3 separate coolants. With the fan being down, we may give them options within it and say, hey, we can replace it with a brand new one, or we could use a certified refurbished one, whatever it may be. So you have the option to select multiples. The last thing to consider when you're designing out how do your rectification process is the customer. Just remember, the end goal of this is to create a rectification quote that will be customer facing. We want to provide it to our customer. So knowing our audience, know who we're giving those quotes to, etc. Utilize that in how we build this out so we can provide quotes in a manner that they're going to understand and will be good and easy for them as well as for us internally. With all that in mind, we're going to take a look at our failure points and recommendation pre-builds. So I'll backtrack into my Maintenance Planner pre-builds folder. I'll click on my failure points. And as I was going through my options there, I kind of gave them scenario names. So in our first one, it may be just something generic. Cool. Here's our AC unit. If we're only going to bill for, say, a diagnostic, it failed. I'm going to quote them a diagnostic. And if they accept it, then we'll do that diagnostic. Boom, I have that one set up and I can attach it to the service level. Or it may be just, like I said the first time, a $400 diagnostic and repair. If it fails, I can use this to keep it a bit more simple. We also have our kind of middle scenario that I came up with. In this one, we may want to know why it failed. So yes, we marked that it failed, but why? What was the failure point? In this instance, if power was out, we may call it a power restoration. Now, that is the customer-facing name for that, because remember, these go to the customer. If the fan was broken or wasn't working, we may call it a fan replacement or the coil. If the duct wasn't working, we may just call it a duct fix, and we're going to charge one rate no matter what we do to fix that duct. Same with our coolant. It was low on coolant. We may need to top it off. So we write our replacement and top off, and we're just going to do one flat rate across the board for that. So we could use it in that manner. We could have also set them up to be a bit more detailed. That one, I may create my failure points. They look very similar to my middle situation, but power restoration, fan diagnostic, coil diagnostic, our duct diagnostic, our coolant replacement and top off is still there. In here, I'll have you take note that the sell price on these is 0, but I do have one at 50. Reason being within this, I may say, cool, we did a fan diagnostic so that they can see. Also, I know that fan diagnostic or that power restoration, figuring it all out is going to take about 60 minutes. And I want to keep track of that labor as an estimate time. So our Pre-build, again, can house material, labor, and or a sell rate. So we may not always utilize the sell rate, even though we're keeping track of things. If I backtrack all the way out and go into my recommendations, in our first scenario, remember, there wasn't really a recommendation. It was, boom, we just do the diagnostic. It's $400. Our guy fixes it, whatever it is. In that second one, we may have had those pieces. And while that's a bit more generic, we still may not have recommendations. But if we get to that third version of it where, hey, we told you what broke or what was wrong, there was low coolant. I may actually need to be more specific within that. Yes, there was low coolant, but what coolant version do we need to refill it with? What type? Is it our R22, R32, 410A? Those may come with different material costs. So we want to utilize those costs and keep track of them separately. It may have been the duct, and cool, we did our diagnostic and we realized we just need to clean the duct out. There's nothing wrong with it. Or it's completely destroyed. They had rats in there chewing away at it. We need to fully replace this duct. So you could get more specific if we really need to. So creating, again, how do we want to utilize our failure points and recommendations will determine how we're going to build out our pre-builds that we're going to use. Now that we've built our pre-builds, we normally move to our next step. But before we make that move, we'll want to note two big things. One, if we noticed, again, as I mentioned, not all of our pre-builds had sell rates. Sometimes we may be using the pre-builds to capture just the estimated cost and labor, or potentially to associate certain materials to a job, but the sell rate may come from something completely different. Examples of that. Let's say we do quarterly tune-ups for commercial clients and include the filter change, and we know it takes about 2 hours each time we go out there. We may want to create our pre-build to capture that filter, the material costs for it, and those 2 hours of estimated labor and labor costs for each quarterly visit. However, they typically pay us annually. So once a year, they pay us for those 4 separate jobs that we end up doing. So now I can create my pre-build to capture all of those costs of my filters, of those guys' labor, still make it sellable at 0 so that it's not affecting the bill on that job. And then later, we would do something that's going to incur the actual cost for that annual contract that they're doing. Keep that in mind, though, when we get to our job closeout discussion. The other thing that we should note is just because we have a pre-build with a charge rate doesn't mean it's set in stone. We will have the chance to adjust the rate on any given pre-build on not only an asset by asset basis, but a contract by contract basis as well. This would be good. This could be good to use for when when the work itself is standard, but the charge rate varies for any number of reasons. So again, we go back to my example of we do a quarterly commercial tune-up that is going to cost, say, $250 per tune-up that we would do. However, we work with the local university, and per that contract, we can only charge them $195. I may not create new pre-builds for that, but when I get to that contract level, I can adjust what the charge rate is for the same standard pre-build for the contract at that university. So now that we have all of that done, we've built our pre-builds, we have those things to consider in our mind. We're now ready to tackle our next steps. Now that we have all our pre-builds built, we need to start configuring our asset templates. These will be the generic templates that are used to create the different assets we manage at each site. So they will be located in our system setup menu. So our system setup, and if we scroll down a little bit and we hover over customer assets, we will find the 2 components that we will need to build out. The first one we will start in is our service levels. In here, we'll want to create service levels for every potential frequency at which we may service an asset. Some standard ones are monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, and we're going to go ahead and add in our annual by clicking our new service level in the top right there. Giving our service level a name, we do want to make sure that it's a name that we can easily recognize when we're putting onto things. So think of how you want to name and your naming conventions for these, and then the amount of time that the service level or that frequency reoccurs. So our annual would be yearly. However, you can use any combination of years, months, or days if you do have some frequencies that are a little off standard. And then we do hit our create. And now we have our new service level. that's pretty much it for the service levels. The next part of the walkthrough, we'll actually create our brand new AC unit template. Well, we're not going to create it. We're going to utilize kind of a slightly built one, but we'll go through all the steps. So I have my AC unit here. I could use create new asset template, and it's going to open up the exact same way that this one will, except nothing will be filled out. The first tab in here will be our asset type or our details. We will want to give that asset template a name, of course, something that'll help us identify what asset template we're using. Next to this, we'll find our reference information, so the section, and then of what standard. These can be used as sometimes there's codes and regulations around these particular asset types, and this is where you can enter that information so that it populates on forms later on. Now, the next row starts with our job cost center and our quote cost center. And I know they do say optional, but it is best practice and highly suggested that you add the cost center that your jobs will be related to, that are going to be created via Maintenance Planner, and any of your rectification quotes. What cost center will they be related to? The reason behind this is that in Maintenance Planner, it will refuse to create jobs or quotes, these rectification quotes, if there are no cost centers associated with it. So this acts as kind of a fail-safe to ensure that the Maintenance Planner functions properly and does have a cost center to associate itself to. If you also utilize a particular technician to perform maintenance on this asset type, this is where you can come in and set them to do that. However, there is a more convenient way to do this, which provides a bit more variability of choice of technician and at that given time, and it's not going to actually add any steps to your workflow. So we won't do that here. And then this is where we get to put in our description for that asset template. The next tab we will see up here is going to be our service levels. This is where we get to associate our service levels with this asset template. So we'll notice on this particular template, our AC unit, sometimes they get service quarterly, sometimes they get service monthly. Some people have semi-annual contracts. We're going to go ahead and add our annual. So we can look through our service level dropdown, pick our annual. We'll notice this is pulling from those service levels we created earlier, and we click our add. We'll notice it builds this kind of chart here for all of our service levels. And the second table, or the second column in that table, is going to be our charge rate. Now, this is where we're going to start putting in that pre-build that we did earlier. So let's say this was supposed to be my pre-build for that tune-up. So on the annual tune-ups, I could go in, find where that's going to be. It's my annual AC tune-up from my demo here. Click on it. And now, whenever I create this maintenance planner job for this asset template, it's going to drop this pre-build onto that job. So the time that was related to it, the charge rate that was related to it, will all already be associated with this job. We'll also notice as we've added those asset or service levels, we have our little minus sign over here in red. This is if we really wanted to delete those service levels. We also have something that is a standard throughout Simpro, which is the little gray dots in the front. And this allows us to make our adjustments visually to the order that things are going to be in. As usual, we do want to hit save. When we do hit save, our little minus sign is going to go away and be replaced by our options. The reason this option is important is because earlier I mentioned that we add our failure points and our recommendations here as well. But there's nothing too obvious on the screen for where we do that at. It will, however, be under our options. So we will need those in order to start adding our failure points and our recommendations. So we're going to do this in our annual service level. So if I click on my options, we'll see we still have our delete ability, even though that minus sign is gone. But if I click on our edit failure rates points, it should bring up our failure point screen. If we recall earlier, when we were talking about the different configuration options for failure points and for recommendations, this is where we would have decided how we're going to utilize those. And then when we're going to add our failure points. So we're going to go ahead and add a couple of them. We click on new. It gives us a line on our page here. I'll add in a few lines so I can make sure we're adding in all the potential failure points that we may want to select. So we're going to go ahead and enter the things that could go wrong here. Our duct could be the problem. Our fan, it could be an electrical issue. It could be the evaporator coil. We'll just shorten this and say coil. Or it could be our refrigerant. Any one of those could be the problem here. Our second column in that table we'll see is our standard ID or code for this failure point. In some instances, laws or regulated inspection criteria may determine exactly what failure points to use. And this allows for recording of that based on those standard IDs for failure points so that it can be populated on forms later. Third column is going to be our severity. It is a hard-coded list consisting of those severities. So you'll have critical, non-critical, non-compliant, non-conformant. While sometimes standards or codes, etc., may determine what those are, they may not. And then you can use them kind of how you would want to. They could be utilized, say, to help determine the next steps of the rectification process. So maybe non-conformant applies to nice to have things for which you can provide an upgraded quote in due time, whereas non-compliant or critical requires them to take corrective actions. So we want to not only provide a quote, but do it promptly to help get them back into good standing. So I'm going to just go through and change these so we can see them populate on our walkthrough later. We'll leave them as is. And then we have our pre-builds. So if we go back to our first scenario, maybe just by selecting a failure point, we give them a diagnostic. Right here, we can add in a pre-build for our diagnostic. That way, once they make their selection, or once our technician makes a selection of our ducts being the problem, we add in our duct diagnostic. And we can send the quote out for that diagnostic if that's the endpoint of that process. For more complicated ones, say our refrigerant. We want them to click on refrigerant, but there may be nothing associated with it. At this point, because we're going to use the failure, or we're going to use the recommendations to determine what we're going to quote that customer. You may have that middle ground where we do want to put something on there. We want to determine, all right, cool, it is a coil. That's going to be the issue, but we're going to run the diagnostic on it, which will be a cost. And then we're also going to add in the recommendation of after that diagnostic. So we can add in all of them. So in these instances, I'm going to go throw in one more in here under our fans. If I search, I can find my stuff. I'll put in simply a fan replacement so we understand the different options we have to put in here. Now, commonly, I'm going to hit save as we should be so that our work does not go anywhere. But we'll notice we don't see any recommendations within this. What can I do to add in my recommendations? The answer is if we use our arrows on the very end, it'll open up what is our recommendations portion. So under our refrigerant, if we recall, yes, I could come in and say, hey, we top off the refrigerant and it's just going to be one set price. Or I may build by different refrigerant types because they come at a different cost to me. So I can add in my recommendation. Our refrigerant was the failure point. And the way we're going to resolve that is we're going to select which refrigerant we are actually going to populate in here. So if I go in and add my refrigerants to this, I will populate our pre-built. So we'll see I still have the words coolant refill on there. So R22, our R23, or was it our 410A? I can go and put in our name. This is what will show up for the technician when they go to select which of the recommendations to utilize. I will shortcut that a bit. 32. Will forgive my inability to type at times. And now we've added in our recommendations. Now, based on this, I may also have our pre-builds for the recommendations. So we have them here. There may be the charge rate at the default price for them. But if I wanted to change what that charge rate was on this particular asset template, I have the ability to set that here. So in this one, just so we can see some change in the numbers, it may not be that much. I'm pretty sure the one that I set up was not for 500, but I'll throw that in just so we can see one that will utilize what's here versus one that will utilize the default price of that actual pre-build. So this is where we begin utilizing those components. So in here, we have our coils, ducts, electrical fan, and our refrigerant. I'm going to go ahead and fill this one out for us anyway. So our electrical power restoration. And then under our ducts, say we do that duct diagnostic and we learn it needs to be a cleaning or there needs to be a replacement, and we want those recommendations. I can still go in and add more related to those. So we'll see that it is trying to pull that duct diagnostic because it is the one here. But if this recommendation were to be something different than what it is, I can change. In this instance, it's a replacement. That will be our recommendation. And it's going to pull that in. And in this one, it's just a regular cleaning. It still keeps our duct diagnostic charge so that I can say the ducts were wrong. It's going to at least be this much. But now when I come into my recommendations, if they are to recommend a replacement of those ducts, we have a new charge that's going to be levied on top of it. Or if we're just saying it's still our cleaning, it's going to be this pre-build. So we can see those different scenarios and different ways to build this out working out. To save all of this, of course, we hit our save and finish. It will take us out, and there's our service level that we have now created. The next tab over is going to be our custom fields. And this is where we're going to create our fields to house any data we want to keep on hand about this asset. So let's say, as we see here, we want to know the make, the model, the serial number, the installation date, the location at the house that this air conditioning unit is, or maybe the location in the house that our thermostat is at. Whatever it may be, this is where we add all of that information. We're going to add a new one in here so we can see the creation process. So we'll hit our create custom field. And we see our field name, and I'm going to call this our refrigerant type, so that our guys don't have to guess while they're out there in the field. We've kept track of what type of refrigerant this AC unit utilizes. On our side here, we see our options are mandatory. So this will force this field to be filled out when we create the asset itself. Read only, it will, the first time you go to create this asset, you'll be able to enter information, but then that field is locked down and it can't be changed anymore. We have our different field types. So is the data we're trying to keep, when we say refrigerant type, is it going to be text? So that's going to be open, freehand, alphanumeric text. Is it a date, in which it's going to force you to pick a date? Likely not for refrigerant type. Is it a list? We may want to come in and list the different refrigerant types that we're going to put in here to give our guys the chance to pick the right ones. Is it going to be a barcode? Barcodes can get utilized for assets where we create the barcode and then assign it to this asset. Then anytime someone in the field goes out there and scans that barcode, it automatically pulls up that asset. It's going to be numeric, so it's just going to be numbers, no alpha related to it. Is this going to be a hyperlink, which means whatever information we enter into it, the system will automatically turn into a hyperlink that we click and it'll take you to that URL. In our instance, of course, we want a list. So I'm going to add a couple pieces here so we have our options. Again, we'll just go back through the ones we had previously. And we hit mandatory to make sure this gets filled out when we create our asset, and create. So now we have our new refrigerant type here. As I said before, if we need to adjust our order, we use our gray dots on the very end, and we can get rid of them using our minus sign at the very end. I will, of course, hit save. We will move on to what is our next tab over here, which is our test readings. And these are designed around the readings, the inspections, the test, or data that is collected when the technician goes to do work on that asset. So when they actually show up to do the work. The key addition here is that we can have test readings that are associated to a single service level. The example of that, if we remember back, monthly inspections may be more spot inspections. I simply go look, make sure things are good, hit some buttons, a light comes on, we're good to go. Whereas our yearly inspections may be more in depth. So I don't need to do all the same stuff from my yearly that I need on my monthly inspections. So now the system, with utilizing Maintenance Planner, will allow us to associate these test readings to particular service levels. So these will be our actual test readings that we're going to take, the field type, and then the service levels it's related to. So I'm going to add 2 new ones into our list so that we can see the functionality of associating them to a particular service level. So if I hit create test reading, a common reading we may need to take during our annual inspection is the AC's amperage. I want it to be mandatory during our inspections. And the field type text date list numeric, I'm just going to put numeric to make it easy. And down here, we will notice our service levels. This one currently is associated to all, but if we click on our manual, it allows us to select which service levels that are available on this asset template do we want to associate this test reading with. I can pick one. I can pick more than one because this may happen on our semi-annuals as well, but we don't do it on our quarterly and we don't do it on our monthlies. Once I've done that, I hit create and our new question is added. Once again, we can change the order and this will determine the order that they appear within the mobile app for the guys in the field. I'll go create another one as well. This time though, something we don't really care about. The reason we'll put this in there so that I can show you if I were to put this on a different inspection, so this happens on my monthly inspections, I'll even make it mandatory. And if I hit create, this is so that later when we do our walkthrough on the mobile app, you'll notice that when I pick our annual inspection, what color was the door will not be the question that comes up. So it'll be tied to a particular service level. The last tab in here is going to be our attachments. In this tab, this is where we can attach any photos, diagrams, whatever it may be that we need to associate with this asset template. Now remember, whatever we associate in here will populate with every asset that we create using this template. So this may not be a good place for things that are a bit more specific to different AC units, but it could be a good place to put some generic information, a copy of the inspection that you would normally do or go through, whatever it may be. So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and click and drag over here a basic diagram of an AC unit to throw it in there just so my guys have this copy of it when they are out in the field. We'll notice once we add our attachment, we get our little one here that tells us there's an attachment associated with this particular asset template. Once we've filled out everything we need within our asset template, we save and finish, and we have created our AC unit demo asset template. Now that we've completed much of our behind-the-scenes foundational configuration, so creating and configuring everything that will have an impact on the day-to-day aspects and functionality of Maintenance Planner, let's dive into the actual day-to-day components and then the workflow. The first component we'll want to tackle is our customer contracts. As we gain new customers, we'll want to be setting up contracts for them in Simpro. These contracts will serve not only as a way to monitor and report on cost and revenue for all the contracts related jobs and invoices, but also serve as the connective tissue between the different assets and allow for better reporting, better management, and better control over the customer's assets based on the contracts they are associated with. As you probably noted, I keep calling them customer contracts, and that's because they live inside the customer card. So let's go create a contract for one of our customers. So we head over to our people module in our customers. We will find our customer. So we're going to go ahead and make a contract for Steve here. We go to our rates tab and then our contracts subtab. And in here, we will find our list of all our active and our expired contracts. To create a new contract, we use our create contract on the right side here. And it takes us to our new contract details page. So we'll notice under the contract name that it's automatically put in the customer's name. We want to leave that name there for best practices. What it helps with is later when you go to search for things, you can search that customer name and you'll find not only the customer, but you'll find that customer's contracts. So it makes it easier to find them later in the system. So for our example here, we're going to leave that customer name. For the next part of it, after the dash or however you want, the nomenclature of what you're going to put in will depend on your own business operations, your choices, how you would want. For our example here, though, I will just put in our annual agreement. Next to that, we see our start date. This is good to have in Simpro, especially if you're creating contracts ahead of time, because Simpro will not allow any jobs to be created that are associated with this contract if it's before the start date of this contract. So let's say this start date wasn't until the 31st, we wouldn't be able to create a job. We're going to throw it in there. The other side of that coin is going to be our end date. So if the contract does have a finite end date, we can put that in here. And in the same vein as the start date, it won't create jobs before it. The system won't create jobs after that end date. In many instances, though, we may not know when the end date is. Maybe it's a contract that just renews over and over and over, so we don't have an end date. Fortunately, Simpro doesn't make the start date or the end date mandatory for that very reason. Next to that, we'll find our contract number. This is a field that you create, so it is an internal field for the company. It can help create unique identifiers, or if you do keep track of the contract numbers, you can fill them in here for reporting purposes. Next to that, we will see our value. And this is the value of this contract to the company. So, for example, let's say we do semi-annual inspections on this contract. And we know that each inspection takes 2 hours. And our guys go out there, we pay them $25 an hour for the time that they go out there. So that means it's $50 per job. They're doing 2 of them. So the value of the contract would be $100. It is our cost value internally. The other good thing by putting a number in here is the system will now start giving you alerts as this contract approaches that value. So if we start sending jobs out there and the cost on those jobs approaches our $100, we'll get an alert up here in Simpro that will tell us that this contract is approaching its value. The next space over here is going to be our notes. So any notes on this contract that we want there for reporting purposes or just to see, we will put in this notes area. Next to that, we will find email. This is where we can put an email address that's going to be associated with this contract. The important thing to note here is if you put an email address in here, it will override any other emails that are utilized with this customer or with the contacts of this customer. So this is the overriding one. So do be careful if you do put an email address in here. Again, it is also not mandatory, so we don't need to put one in there. And we have our contract ID, which is auto-generated by Simpro for unique identifier purposes. Our next tab over is going to be our materials. And in here, we're allowed to change the pricing tier related to this contract. So if this customer utilized, instead of their normal rate or instead of the default rate in the system, we had a special pricing tier for anybody that signed up for this particular contract. We could associate that here so that any jobs related to this contract will now automatically use this particular pricing tier. You're also able to still override whatever the default of that tier is as well. So I could come in and say it's 60. But we'll move it back. Next tab over was our service levels. And we will notice here that it has added all the potential service levels that could be related to this contract. Because the system does not automatically know what assets are going to be associated to it, nor does it know what levels are going to be associated to it, it just adds all of them so that they are here just in case. We'll also notice that any of the assets that have actual pre-builds related to them, the pre-builds will automatically be filled in here. This also gives us a chance where we can go in and add pre-builds to different things if we need to. So let's say on this particular contract, we throw in another pre-build here. So I can go contract by contract and add my pre-builds that'll have my time and my charge rate related to them. We'll also notice we could technically adjust our time here. This would make adjustments on our asset labor reporting. And we could also change the actual charge rates here as well if we needed to. So now this one will be $175 for this particular service level on just this contract. So even though those things are associated with this on a regular basis, we're overriding it here if we need to. The last tab in here is going to be our inflation. This allows us to inflate the charge rates of this contract on a standard time frame. So let's say on the 1st of 2024 or of 2025, we were going to raise this by 5%. I could go in and add that, and the system will automatically on January 1st raise the charge rates of all of the service levels by 5%. I'll get rid of that since we're not actually going to utilize it. Now we want to create our contract. So I will hit create here, and we will notice it has added my contract in here. We'll also notice that a customer is allowed to have more than one contract. There's many different reasons for that, as they may have many different contracts. Maybe they have a contract per site and they have a bunch of different sites. Maybe they have one site, but they bought their stuff from you all at different times. So they have different contracts that are mitigating those different assets. It could be any number of reasons, but you can have as many active contracts against a customer as you would like. We also have our options on the side here that gives you your view contract if we wanted to open up, and remove contract, so we can get rid of it if the contract has already started. We can also expire these contracts, and that's what the grouping at the bottom is, our expired contracts. And we could technically renew a contract from here as well. So now that's creating our customer contracts. Now that we've successfully created our customer contract, we need to go and create our assets for that site. Again, we'll notice the contracts are created at the customer level. However, the assets will be created at the site level. So let's go ahead and create a site. So we'll hover over our people module. We will go to our sites. We will find our customer, who I happen to know lives here. And we head to our customer assets tab. In here will be the list of any assets that are already associated with that site, but we're going to go ahead and create a new customer asset. Once we hit our create, we will want to pick our asset type. So I will back that out. We'll notice we get our drop down of all of our actual asset templates that we've created. So I could go ahead and select here, or if I had a bunch of them, I can actually type in here and it will search through those for that particular asset type. Next to it, it should have that site automatically in there. Next to that is our display order. So this is just the order in which the assets will be listed on our customer assets tab. The next number available should pop up in the display order automatically for you, but you can change these numbers and move things around on your own. We also now have the ability to associate our contract to that asset. We'll notice there are two in here because our customer had two active contracts. So what you will see under the contract dropdown is always the active contracts related to any customers that are associated with this site. So in this instance, we're going to pick our annual maintenance agreement. We then need to fill out our custom fields that we created when we created our asset template. So we will answer all of these questions. Ones with asterisks, of course, are going to be mandatory. Ones that do not have it, we don't have to fill in, but I'm going to go ahead and put something in there. Our location, and then our refrigerant type. The next tab over will be our service levels. And this is where we're going to see the system will automatically add those default service levels that we created during our, while creating our asset template. We can add more. So if this particular asset went against the grain and had a different one, I can come to my dropdown and I can add the ones that were already previously associated with the asset template, but weren't defaults, or even any other service level if I need to add it on there. So I'm going to throw my quarterly on there and hit add so we can see it work. We also have the ability to take them off if need be. Up here is where we can put in our service start date. So when do we want these, the maintenance jobs for this to start? Put our date. If we use it up here, it's going to auto fill in all of these service dates based upon the incremented time that we have set for them. So this is what helps us standardize when those assets are all getting service. We also have the ability to come in here and enter them individually if we really want to. So if they are on a different level, maybe those annual ones don't happen in the same time frames as their semi-annual ones. We can make those adjustments freely. Our next tab over is going to be our attachments. Now this is going to be a little different than the attachments of the asset template because those are going to be applied to all assets made from that template. This is going to be for this specific asset. So in this instance, I am going to go ahead and add in a wiring diagram for carrier so that my guys have it in the field whenever they go to look at this asset. Our next tab over is history. And this first part of it is our service history. So this is going to be the history of any jobs or quotes that this asset was assigned to or associated with. We'll see all of that info here. You'll be able to see the employee that did their job, if it was tested. You'll see when it was tested, what service level that testing was associated with, did it pass or fail, and any notes that they took on that testing will populate here as well. Next to that, our next subtab over there is our transfer history. And this will just be any history of transferring this asset. So yes, that does mean in Simpro, we can transfer this asset to keep all of its history and its information, moving it from this site to potentially another site. So if down the road, for some reason, Steve decided he's going to pick up his whole AC unit and take it with him to his new home, I could transfer that and keep the history with it. The last tab over here is going to be our related assets. Now, this is where we can create our parent-child relationships between assets. On this instance, I won't put one in, but in a moment, I will show you one that already has this parent-child relationship already established. To actually create our asset, of course, we hit our save and finish. We'll click back to site to be able to see our asset list, and here are all of our assets. And number 3 on our list is here. Now, if we need to change the order of them, of course, I can grab my little gray bar on the end, move things around. I want the AC unit for our demo to be the very top thing there. So there, we've moved everything around. Now, as promised, we'll take a look at this thermostat so we can see a parent-child relationship that is already set up. So we'll see the parent is the air conditioning unit that is in the assets here. And if I want to see the actual asset tree, the visual of those relationships, I can put it here. So we can imagine you could have a whole big tree of assets to be able to tell what affects what touches what's in control of what. You may also screen print this, save that image, and then drop it into the attachments of that asset. So maybe your guys in the field now can see this asset tree as well. So we've gone through, we've now created our contracts, and we just finished creating our asset for our job. We've now gone through and we've just finished creating our assets. So we have handled our necessary system configurations, created our contracts, and created our assets. Now it's time for us to dive into the Maintenance Planner workflow. So with Maintenance Planner, everything's going to begin with creating our quotes or jobs. We'll see why I say quotes as well in a little bit. But now, instead of our process beginning here at either our quotes module or our jobs module, everything is going to begin in our Maintenance Planner module here under Utilities. So we'll click on Maintenance Planner. And now we need to pull those Maintenance Planner assets up because Maintenance Planner centers around assets. So we're going to pick a date range, and this date range is going to center around the service dates for those assets. You'll see we have a lot of preset options in here to make it a little bit easier. But if you do want to be a bit more specific, we have some options where you get to choose the end dates that you may be looking at. For our example here, we are going to choose this month so that the assets we just put into the system will populate, as well as a few others, so we can see what it looks like filled out. We also have the ability to filter by customer, site, customer asset type, the service levels, even zones if we utilize them. This buffer period here is going to add a buffer period on the front and the back end of our date range. This could be useful because if we remember, not only do weekends come up sometimes, but let's say we had a job that was supposed to be due on the 1st of next month. We may want to include that in this search just because if we wait till next month, we're going to be behind the 8 ball on that one. So this buffer period can be added front and back end. Now at ours, we're just going to keep it very simple, and I'm going to go ahead and click on search. And we will notice it's going to pull up all of the assets whose service date falls within our date range. The system's going to divide all of those assets up by site, then contract, and lastly, the service date. The reason it divides them up in that order is the system is trying to create a system where all of the jobs that we create all are on the same site, under the same contract, and have the same service date, so that we can put them on one job instead of each asset having its own singular job. And if there's a lot of them, we end up having to assign or schedule 9, 10 jobs to one person at one time. This makes it much easier. Now, the way we create those actual jobs and select which assets we are going to create jobs for is we can come in and we can pick the contract, or if we don't have contract, this would be the site. We can select this, and it's going to select all of the ones related to that contract for that day. We could also, if we come down further, we'll notice under this one, maybe we have multiple units underneath each asset type. So I could just pick this asset type. We're only going to do the ACUs at this point, not their actual thermostat. I can even get more granular. If I click on my arrow here, I could see each individual asset, and I could go in and say, you know what, we're only doing this particular asset on this day. We're going to do the other ones at a different time. So we can get very granular or kind of take a step back and just select all of them if we need. So for this instance, I'm going to go ahead and select this one, makes it a little easier. And we're going to go find the ones we are looking for that we just created for Steve. And then I will scroll to the bottom of my page so I could scroll, or if I want, I could use our little jump arrows here on the side. Click on that and it will take me to the very bottom of the page. Now at the very bottom is where we find our bulk actionables. So these are actions that are going to occur on every one of the assets at the very top that we selected with our arrows. So all of these. We could skip period. So let's say the jobs that we selected don't need to be done. We could click skip period, and based upon that service level, it's automatically going to increment to that next service date. We could create jobs, which we will do in a bit. We could also create quotes, like I said earlier. So instead of starting at the job point, we may start at the point of we provide quotes to those customers. Let's say they need to approve that actual annual inspection and the cost of it before you come do it. You can provide them a quote. They approve it, then we convert that quote to a job. So maintenance planner doesn't have to start at the job point. We also can send a notification. So say we did everything for next month and we want to start notifying those people now. We could click on all of them, click send a notification, and it'll send the email to all of those customers that, hey, you have some asset service dates coming up. Give us a call, whatever it may need to say to get their attention. You could also print that notification for anyone still using snail mail or however you may want to utilize that. You could print the notification and then provide it to the customer. We'll also notice at the bottom, we have a project name field and an assigned technician field. The apply project name field will append a project name to all of these jobs that we create or quotes that we create. Some people may utilize this, some may not. I am going to go and put that in so we can see the project name field populate when I go to create these jobs. Assigned technician allows us to assign a technician to all of the jobs that we are about to create. If you remember earlier, we could also assign the technician at the asset template point. And I told you there might be a quicker, easier way for you to do that is a bit more malleable, because let's say that employee transitions to a new job, etc. We need to change it. We would have to go into the asset template. Well, if we utilize it here, we may be able to on the fly make those adjustments. So I could assign it by auto assigning, which means it will assign whoever is on that asset template for those particular assets. Or I could pick a particular employee and say, cool, all of these are going to go to David this time. I'm not going to assign because in HAS, we don't assign the jobs to them. We actually schedule them out on specific days. So depending upon your scheduling processes, you may assign, you may schedule, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and create these jobs. It's going to give us a little check to see if we wanted to make these jobs or not. I click OK. We're going to get a screen that shows us all the jobs that have been created. I could click into each one of these if I really wanted to go into that specific job. But for our purposes, we're going to go to our view jobs table so you can see the jobs that it creates. And it throws them into our pending jobs. We'll also notice if we hover over our status, when we did our system configuration, we created a brand new status for all of our jobs that were created via Maintenance Planner. And that'll make it much easier for us to quickly look at this pending jobs table and see our Maintenance Planner jobs. They'll be a different color than all the other ones that are going to start populating in here as we get more service jobs, as we get more quotes that get converted into jobs. This screen's going to start to fill up, and we want to be able to easily see which ones we need to actually utilize our Maintenance Planner workflow for. Now, I'm going to open this job up as well, just so we can see some of the things that did occur on this job. So one, I go ahead and open my job. We'll notice based upon the description options that I picked when we did our system configuration, we get our automatic description thrown in here. There we go, the asset ID, the type, the service level, the due date for that. So those description configuration components that we chose will determine what description bits go here. If I go to my settings, we can see that it's given it its Maintenance Planner Annual Demo. That was that job name that I had there. I can go into my parts and labor, and we'll see it automatically added that pre-build that we associated with our annual inspections. So all of that parts are there. The labor that's going to be associated with it is all there. Because I have my jobs locked, like we chose in our system configuration, we'll notice everything is grayed out because those components are locked. Our guys later will still be able to add stuff, but it's going to do it and it won't affect the billable amount. I'll also come into our customer asset itself so we can see that it automatically associated the asset for this job to it. So that when we schedule our technician, they will already see this asset associated with the job. Now, I will click Save and Finish. I'll go back to our jobs table. Next step usually in this process would be scheduling. But scheduling, because there's multiple ways that it gets done, whether you assign, whether you schedule, whether you do it from this page here, whether you do it from within inside the job, or you go to the schedule itself, all of those will depend on your actual processes and workflows that you currently do. That part of the maintenance planner process will not change. You will still schedule in the same manner that you schedule most of your work. So we won't walk through that part. But imagine now the next step we take in our process is we schedule this job so that our guys in the field will now have the job available on their mobile app. Now we are looking at Simpro Mobile. We have scheduled our job and now it's time for our technician to actually perform the work at hand. Now, in this walkthrough, we're not going to take a deep dive into Simpro Mobile itself, as we should have seen that a bit by now, and there's also other walkthroughs that go through that. In this one, what we're going to focus on is the differences within Simpro Mobile that you gain when using Maintenance Planner. So our technician sees their job, they're going to open that job, they would start travel, time would go by, start work, whatever you all's typical process is going to be in the workflow for utilizing Simpro Mobile. Now, up to this point, nothing should have changed. We're still seeing the same screens. They should still be doing the same components of the workflow that they normally do. But they'll scroll down, and where all the changes and adjustments are going to happen are within the assets area of Simpro Mobile. Well, notice we have one untested asset on there, and that is the one that was added to that job via Maintenance Planner. So I'll open up our assets. We'll see our asset is there. If I click on the little arrow to the right of the asset, I can see more information about said asset if I need. Close that back up. And now we want to actually test our asset. So they're going to go through their maintenance inspection or their annual inspection, whatever it may be that they need to do, whether it's against this asset or multiple assets. So we're going to hit our plus test. We'll see it gives us the information. There's the asset template type at the top there. We can see our information about it again. It also tells us what service level this is related to. You'll notice next to that is the ability to change the service level. So if the technician was on the wrong service level, they could hit change, decide which one they are doing. I'm not going to do that. I'll hit my back and we'll start our test again. So we're going to leave it as our annual inspection. Below that, our test results. We could see our past results as we see normally whether there's maintenance planner or not. And now we go through and we answer our questions. So is the thermostat functioning properly? Refrigerator line installation. We just go through, we answer our questions. Our amperage. And what we'll notice is this question came up because it was tied to our annual service level. That means if we'd have selected any of the other ones, our AC amperage question wouldn't have come up. If we recall, we created one for our monthly inspection that was what color is the front door, and we don't see that now. So again, that's one of the new benefits you get with Maintenance Planner, the ability to kind of focus the questions into the right service levels. We also have the ability to add attachments onto here. That is something that you have as well. They would be attached directly to this asset on this test. And then we get to the part where we have our pass and fail. Now, this is where things start to change a bit from Maintenance Planner, where we've added in functionality. So while it's untested, of course, it's going to be this blue that lets you know we haven't tested anything. If it is passed, it becomes green. As we all know, greens are good. But if this asset fails the inspection, and we click failed, we're going to get something new. All of those failure points that we built out in the asset template utilizing Maintenance Planner. So we get to choose what the failure points were. We also can see all the severity labels associated with those failure points, so our non-compliant, non-critical, critical. When we pick them, the guys are able to see what that actual failure point is going to pull severity-wise. We also actually have the ability to pick more than one. So let's say our ducts were a problem and the refrigerant is low, I can select more than one failure point. Many times when we go to inspect an asset, it may fail in more than one place. We want to be able to keep track of all of the failure points so the system doesn't force you to have to pick one. In that same vein, the recommendations, which now popped up because we again configured those in our asset template, we're allowed to select more than one. Obviously, this wouldn't be a normal situation, but if I need to do replacement and cleaning, I could do that. We need to replace our refrigerant. I don't remember what refrigerant this particular asset uses. I still have access to go look at the asset's information. We see it as our 410. I can go back and make sure we're using the right refrigerant. Now, this is going to be beneficial because when this goes back to the office, they're going to see the selection of all the failure points and all the recommendations. And then when we go through our rectification process, creating those rectification quotes, we actually have the opportunity to pick and choose which ones we're going to utilize for that quote. I'll go ahead though and put in our result notes. And we will click done. However, you can see they could click next asset if there was a multitude of assets on this job that they needed to go through. If they hit next, it'll just go whichever one is the next in order. But we are done. So I click done. We'll see my asset information sits there. We can see failed real quick at the front. I hit back one more time to get back to my work order. The job card, we'd fill it out like normal. If we had that, we'll also notice that because I put that filter inside of our pre-build earlier, our filter is here, and I'm going to go ahead and tell them we did replace that filter. And then any other components that are standard parts of the workflow for technicians or the field operations team, they would go ahead and complete. Now I'm going to go to our review and finish. We double check, make sure everything is good. If we needed signatures, we get our signatures, and then we go and complete our job. So I will mark this job as complete. You'll notice in there, I also did have our other statuses that we created before. So maintenance planner, non-critical failure, maintenance planner, critical failure. So the guys do have the abilities to pick those to make it easier for you to see. I'll actually switch this from completed to critical failure, just so we can see that status pop up when we delve back into Simpro Premium. Once everything is done, we hit stop work and finish. And now our job is done. Now that our technicians have completed their work, we want to start what is the rectification process. Depending on security group settings, the work orders may or may not need to be approved. And typically we can do that here in our alerts, but we're going to find that also with the addition of maintenance planner, when failures are recorded and those failure points or recommendations added to it, we also get alerts in Simpro. So this becomes a really good starting point for the offices workflow to begin after the technicians are completed. So again, we're going to delve right into our alerts here. We'll notice on here we have not only our work order approval for the work order our guys in the field just completed, but we also have our failures, our critical one for our AC unit and our non-critical for the AC unit itself. So first thing I'm going to do though is dive into this work order. If I click the word work order, should open up. And we'll see, for the most part, the work order is going to remain the same as we've seen at any other instances, our actuals information. But again, assets, since maintenance planner revolves around the assets, this is where we're going to start to see that difference. So in our assets tab, we can actually open everything up with our little arrow here. And what we will notice is not only does it have our test reading sitting here like normal, but because it failed, we now have access to our failure points and our recommendations. So even if I wanted to make adjustments here, we could go in, we could add new failure points, we could get rid of those failure points, etc. on this before approving this and then sending that information to that rectification quote. Now, for the most part, technicians do a good job in my, imaginary company. So I'm going to go ahead and leave everything as is, and I will click approve. This will approve that work order. It's going to close out that alert, but it still leaves our failures here, because we actually have to take action on these failures in order to get rid of these alerts. So if we notice, the entire thing is clickable. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my one critical AC unit demo. It shows me all the failure points that were selected by the technicians in the field. One was the ducts, one was the refrigerant. It also tells me what the recommendations were. So on our ducts one, there were 2 recommendations given. On our refrigerant, there was 1 recommendation given. Now, this is another case where we get to use our bulk actionables. So I can use my check boxes on the end, and then we deal with our actions down here. So depending on which ones I click, do I need to create a quote based upon those failure points in the recommendations? Do I need to ignore this? Maybe this is something we don't need to worry about. It's okay. Or we're fine doing it later. In that case, we can say, hey, please let me know in a month. Maybe again, those non-conformant or non-critical are just things that are like, hey, this would be a really good upgrade to have to help you, but maybe not something we need to quote right now. We also have this button here that says combine pre-builds on quote. This is critical because if we wanted to put all of this on a singular quote, we tell it to combine them all on a quote. If we want to leave them as individual quotes, we select them and just hit create quote. Now I'm going to do something here, a little bit selective. I'm going to combine those pre-builds onto one quote. I want to quote this customer and say, hey, here is your duct issues, here are the refrigerant issues. We should really take care of both of these together. So I will hit my create quote. It's going to double check to make sure we want to do that. I'm going to click OK. And it will show me all the quotes that it has created based upon all of the failure points that were selected. What do we want to do next? We want to continue or view quotes. I'm going to hit view quotes. So we can see it drops them into our open quotes. Depending on your actual quoting workflow, this may be where everything lives. This quote is technically in progress. So if you do have an approval process, this is the point where that process may begin. I'll open up our quote so we can see what it looks like, how it's all been pulled together. We notice our description is automatically created. Our estimate for asset fail is recorded on job, and it refers to that job. So we may save some attachments from that job, pull them into this, provide that to the customer so they know what job we're referring to. We'll also notice if I go to my parts and labor, all of those pre-builds that I had related to those failure points and to those recommendations have automatically pulled onto my quote. So by doing all of that setup work ahead of time, I'm able to quickly craft a quote that's got materials involved in it, that's got labor already associated with it, and I can quickly get this out the door instead of having to craft it manually on my own. The last bit is the asset is still going to be related to this because it is a quote related to that asset because it did fail. At this point, we have everything we need. We would go make any necessary adjustments to this that we want. And then once again, this would follow whatever our standard workflow is at this point in time. There's an approval process. We send it down that lane. If this is something now, once everything's good, we're able to provide it to our customer. We go ahead and we can email that quote off to the customer to try to get approval. So that is how we run through the rectification process itself. If the customer responds, doesn't respond, etc., we're once again going to follow what is our normal quoting pathway within Simpro to resolve that. The last bit of our process that we'll want to work through revolves around billing. This is another place where in utilizing Maintenance Planner, we may have some changes to our standard workflow. So the typical question you need to ask yourself to determine if your workflow is going to adjust when it comes to Maintenance Planner and billing is, do we bill at the time of the job? So in theory, we do the job, what happens on that job or the billables related to it are what create the actual billable that we provide to the customer. If the answer is yes, then nothing really changes. We go through our workflow process as normal. Our job is created, and then we're going to utilize that job completed to build out our invoice in the same way we normally would. We could come in, we could create our invoice from here, whether you go into the job, double check things, and then create it when you use your save and finish. Either way, current workflow process is something we won't change if that is how things are done. On the other side of that coin, though, what if we don't bill at the occurrence of the job? So for example, let's say we bill annually. However, we do work quarterly against that contractor for that client, even though they pay annually. In those instances, we're not necessarily going to use the job itself to create the billable. So we need to use something else in Simpro to resolve that. And that is what we will cover. We'll use the examples here with our Advent and our Camden. They're going to be places where we bill them annually. However, they actually get work done quarterly. So in order to do this, to get that billable, we need to utilize what are recurring invoices in Simpro. So where recurring invoices are going to live is in our little rotation over here. And then we go to our plus recurring invoice. If we've been using service jobs in Simpro or jobs as a whole, we'll start to notice this looks very familiar. So we want to start filling in the details for our recurring invoice. The first thing we're going to do, of course, is the customer. Now, if we recall, when we were creating the contracts for our customers, Simpro automatically tried to put the customer name into that contract. This is one of the reasons why Simpro does that. If you leave that customer name in there, when we go to create this recurring invoice, it's likely related to that contract. So we can quickly find the contract for that customer by simply typing in their name and noticing not only is our customer here, but so are their contracts. And all we have to do is pick the right contract now to associate this with. This will also help us later, not only on some of the down the line reporting, but when we do our contract profitability report within Simpro, we've associated the jobs that are related to this contract to the contract. That'll help us with the costing side of things. And we've associated our invoice to that particular contract, and that'll provide the revenue side of things. So we'll still be able to job cost against the actual contract as a whole to see the profitability of it based upon all the jobs we did under that contract and all the income that we got based upon that contract. Here, I will go ahead and add in our location, so our site. Any other information that you need to put in to the system, we will put in now based upon our current workflows and processes. What do we fill out? What don't we? What information may need to be provided on this invoice for the client? Filling this out like normal. The part that is new is going to be down here underneath the automation portion of everything. So automated. We'll talk about this in a moment. But first piece you want to know is the recurring start date. When do we need Simpro to remind us that we need to create this recurring invoice? Now, what we're doing itself isn't creating the recurring invoice. We're creating the recurring invoice template. So in theory, we're creating this job that's going to sit here. And when Simpro reminds us we need to create that invoice, it's going to use this template to create the invoice for us. So I will backdate this just to make sure that everything does show up. But in this example, on the first of every year, the customer pays us for our annual contract. And then later we start coming out quarterly to do that work. So in the first of the years when that invoice should have been provided, it is yearly. And then our recurring end date. Now we could leave this open-ended if we would like. We can tie it to the actual contract expiry date if there is one on that contract. We could also create our own end date for this whenever we feel it's okay to create that end date. If we need to manually adjust it, we do that here. So like I said, we're going through all that. Now, the automated invoicing that you do see, the system will automatically send this invoice out on the first. We're not going to turn that on at this moment, but if later you decide that's how you want the process to happen, you can always automate the invoicing. Our next step is we need to actually add our billable amounts onto this invoice template. So we click on next in green in the top right. Brings us to, again, something that looks very similar to all of our jobs and quotes in Simpro. We have to think of how we're going to now add our billable amount onto this invoice. Now, we could simply come here, use our pencil to open up our subtotal and put in that billable amount if we really like to, and click update. However, this is not necessarily a best practice within Simpro's workflows. Reason being, if this price changes at any given date, you have to come back into this recurring invoice individually and manually change this. If you're working with a lot of invoices, it may be a really tall task to go back through all of them to have to make these changes. So typically our best practice in Simpro would be to utilize our billables, parts and labor. So we're going to go into parts and labor, and what we will likely use is going to be our pre-builds. We discussed earlier when talking about creating our pre-builds for Maintenance Planner, creating them for our failure points and for our recommendations. I noted then that a pre-build could simply be an empty box that has a billable value to it. That is where this comes in handy, that portion of what a pre-build can be. So we could create a set of pre-builds that are our maintenance agreement billables, divided them out in my instance by the year or by their frequency. So I'll go into my yearly, and I've associated a billable to that amount. So they pay $1,000 annually. We come out quarterly and do work. Click add items. Now my billable is associated here, and there's $1,000 related to it. Everything comes up and now I'm going to save and finish. This will create my template and put it into my recurring invoices queue. So if I open that up, here are all of our recurring invoices. Now notice there's 2 invoices on here to kind of show the difference of what happens between different invoices. So the one at the bottom here is going to be in white. That means this invoice is not due. It is not coming up to be due or anything. However, the one above it we just created and backdated is past due. The reason it is in yellow is because it is past due, or it is within our alert days. So in our system settings, however many days out we set for alerts to start popping up, typically the system starts at a default of 7. These will start turning yellow. We'll start to see alerts that we have recurring invoices that need to be created as well. Now, again, this is the recurring invoice template. So there is no invoice yet. So we need to utilize this template to create our invoice. So much like we've been seeing in many areas, we want to start using our checkboxes on the side so that we can use our bulk actions down at the bottom. Now, there's only 2 here, so it's not too hard to click on stuff. But if this were a list of, say, 100 recurring invoices, I'm not trying to have to go click through the 22 that we need to create right now. Different ways to do that. If I don't want to manually do it, if I click my all button, we'll see that it will click every last one of our invoices. I'll uncheck it. We also have our all due. This will only select the ones that are in yellow and are due. So this can make it much more convenient and easy to bulk select invoices on our path to creating these recurring invoices from our invoice templates. Our bulk action options here, we have create invoices, which we'll do in a moment. We could skip this period if for any reason they weren't going to be paying at this time. We could skip it. The system will automatically increment it based upon that recurring frequency to the next due date. We could archive them. We're done with this particular recurring invoice, but we want to keep it in our archive. So we archive it. We can bring it back up later, whatever it is for reporting purposes, etc. Depending on security group, you may be able to delete the invoice and that gets rid of it out of the whole system. And we can also update invoice pricing. And this is where those best practices come in handy. If we were utilizing pre-bills and say next year, I need to increase the amount of my annual maintenance agreement, it goes from $1,000 to, $1,300. I could go to the pre-bill itself, make that update, then come into my list and select all of my invoices and hit update invoice pricing. And in one fell swoop, I've updated them all across the board instead of having to go in them manually and individually. We could also set an annual inflation rate here. I know we saw this at the contract level already, but this is another chance for you to set that rate at a different level. There may be reasons why you put it at the contract versus here. There may be reasons why you use it here at the recurring invoice versus at the contract point. But either way, know that you can set annual inflation rates in those 2 different locations. We're going to go ahead and create this invoice though. So if I hit create invoices, as usual, Simpro is going to say, are we sure? The other thing that Simpro is asking in this case is, do we need to align the date issued to the corresponding invoice periods? Essentially what this is telling you is that when we go to create an invoice in Simpro, it wants the date issued to be today. Simpro is a point in time system. So when we create it is when it says it's being issued. We may not need to do that every time when we're creating our recurring invoices. Sometimes we create them ahead of time for those recurring invoices. We may give them a 5-10 day grace period of saying, hey, I send it to you early, but it's not due until these other days. In those instances, we want the date issued to line up with the actual invoice. So in the background, our next due date, we would want this to line up with the 1st. In order to do that, we align the dates issued to the corresponding invoice periods. I will hit create invoices. We'll see it tells us what invoices it created. Normally this list would be a little bit longer, so we may not hit open invoice because we don't know which one. I'm going to hit close here. And what we'll notice though is it is now appended that next due date. It changed it by a frequency of 1 year so that the next one will be due then. And that's when we'll start getting the reminder for those. Now, we've created the invoice, but it hasn't been sent to our client yet. Our invoice does still live here in Simpro, and we still have to manually process that and send it to them. So if we go check just to look at our invoice here, our invoices, we can get to them from here. Or if we want to come over, hover over our invoices module and our unpaid invoices, and there is our invoice. So now we are back at the point where this should fall back in line with our usual billing processes of how do we provide this invoice to our clients. The last bit of this puzzle we need to think about is those jobs. We bill this customer annually. However, when we do that job quarterly, what do we do when the job is complete? In a normal service job environment, we take the job, we bill it, invoice, send to the customer. When it gets paid, it gets auto-archived. But if we're not doing that process, how do we get these jobs to disappear out of the system? We want them out of our active queues. So we can find our jobs either in the table there or in our module here. I know it is in my complete jobs. And we're going to go through the process of processing these two jobs. The reason there's two in here is because there's two methods by which you can do this within Simpro. The first method is fairly straightforward. It is simply archive the job. Our technicians have gone, that job is good, ready to go. We just need to archive it. So I'll go to my options and I will go down to my archive job. Now, many clients will create archived reasons to differentiate these jobs from any other ones that we had to archive for any other reason. It can help later on with reporting purposes or just kind of provide some assurance of understanding of why we're actually archiving this job. Now, mine doesn't have any ones related to this, but I'll just pick one and we click archive and we'll see that job disappears from our list. Now, the other method, we may want to keep track of the process that the job is going through. So we may actually want to create that invoice. It will be a $0 invoice. And in Simpro's world, a $0 invoice automatically pays itself and archives it. But it creates that track record of an actual invoice that is in Simpro should we ever need it down the line for any reason. In order to do that, we go through our normal process like we would with this same job. We're just going to do it to this one. So we can create our invoice from here. We can open that job, double check, make sure everything is good. When we hit start or when we hit save and finish, it'll give us an option to create an invoice. But we're going to go from here in our options menu. Here's our invoice now. We can go through, make sure all the terms, everything is accurate. Just in case down the road, we need to provide information about this actual $0 invoice to the client. Or maybe you actually do send them this $0 invoice to show you did the work and that they don't owe you at this time. So we're going to make sure everything is accurate in here. We click our finish. It's created our invoice for this job. It is a $0 invoice, so it automatically has technically paid itself in the background. When we click our finish, that job is now out of our complete queue and is no longer in our active queue. So that is how we deal with not only the billable side of maintenance planner jobs and how we could deal with them both ways. This is also how we can complete those jobs and complete that maintenance planner workflow for the jobs that we aren't technically billing. The last bits and pieces we'll cover about maintenance planner are going to be the reports. If we navigate over to our reports, which are going to be down here, and our view reports, there's a section now for our maintenance planner reporting. We click on it, we'll see that when we add maintenance planner into our system, it gives us a series of 7 reports. These reports are our program preventative maintenance report, our maintenance jobs created, our system activity, asset labor planning, testing averages, annual system condition, and certificate of maintenance. Now, while these 7 are added, there's another report that is very commonly used with maintenance planner, and we'll dive into that one first before we start talking about the 4 main reports here that'll get used. So we're going to move over into our profit and loss. Click there. And in here, we will come to our contract profitability report. Now, again, this is a report that does exist within Simpro, but is bolstered greatly by the use of maintenance planner properly. So just to give you an idea of what the report is before we filter anything, I'm just going to hit search. And we will see the basics of this report exist. So it's telling me what the contract name is, the number that's related to it, that contract value that we put into it, the number of jobs that have been created so far against that contract, job cost, number of invoices, total invoice value, and net profit and gross profit. So as we can see, it's pulling all of the jobs and all of the invoices related to this contract together to be able to give you a big overview of profitability of that contract. Now, this is just our summary version. We actually can also get a invoice and jobs breakdown version of it. In that one, our contract does become mandatory. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we select the right contract to get our details. We could filter it by a little bit more if we wanted to. Also, if we want to include jobs that aren't only invoiced, but say all jobs, in our case, only and fully invoiced due under work, so the only ones in here, even though I'll click all jobs so we can see, we get our settings and we hit our search. And this version is going to start pulling in a bit more information. So now we can go through and look at it and see, hey, there were 2 separate invoices. This is the value of those. So this is our total invoice value that we have against this contract. We can see all of our jobs that may have happened. So this can be very useful when we bill annually, but do jobs quarterly. Or even if we have a contract that while we're doing quarterly stuff, service work is also included within it, and we can see the true value of this contract. How many jobs are we doing based versus how many invoices are they paying for on a regular basis? What is the summary of all of that? So this is our contract profitability report that we see here, and it shows us some of the basics again of cost versus the value, invoice value related to all of our contracts in Simpro. In a minute, we're going to jump out of Simpro Premium and we'll talk about 4 of the other 7 reports. They're going to be the big 4 reports that people tend to use when they're utilizing Maintenance Planner. Now, let's talk about 4 of the Maintenance Planner specific reports that we will now get when we turn Maintenance Planner on. So when we had clicked into where our reports were and gone into our Maintenance Planner reports, again, here are the 7 that we see: our program preventative maintenance, maintenance job created, system activity, asset labor planning, testing averages, annual system condition, and certificate of maintenance. We're going to talk about just 4 of these reports. The others you'll be able to just go into, look around, click on them. But we wanted to highlight 4 of the big ones that get utilized in the system. The first main one is our program preventative maintenance report. This report is designed to show us past and planned asset testing based on the service levels assigned to the assets. So it's fairly self-explanatory, but the big reason we cover this report is because this report can be made available in the customer portal. So it can be a customer-facing report. If you go into your settings for their customer portal and you allow for customers to see this report, they can log into their system. They can go to the little reports area that they have under maintenance, under their assets area, and see this program preventative maintenance report, and not only see their past history, we can see our green and our red for our pass and fail, but they can see the future history of their service dates for when things are supposed to be getting serviced. So it's one way they can keep track of their own services that are coming up. The next report we'll look at is the system activity report. This one simply helps you know what has occurred with every asset on every site, such as defects or quotes raised to rectify those defects. So in theory, it's just a very large log of all the activity related to those assets. Report number 3 is going to be our testing averages report. As the name suggests, we see the testing averages, but it's related to your technicians. We can see the number of assets certain technicians test per week or month, divided by the number of actual days the technician was scheduled. So it gives you a sense of how often are they testing things, who is doing what, etc. So another one of those reports where you can start to better hone in on who should be doing what work to better support the business. And the last one we'll talk about, which is one of the big ones that gets utilized, is our asset labor planning report. This one reports on the forecast of labor that will be required for testing all the assets during a given period. This report can be very useful if we're looking at this report and we know that in August we get busy. We can start planning now, getting that labor, making sure we have everything settled for August to be prepared to take on all those tasks that we need to do. Another key component of this is, in order for it to function, you need to ensure that time has been associated to the service levels on the contracts. So this can be done inside the pre-builds, which is usually where it's more suggested for you to put that, because then those pre-builds will automatically append to those contracts. But you can also manually add time at the contract level. So if you don't have time on those pre-builds, you could do it at the contract level, but you need to also be aware that it's still going to require a pre-build to be loaded into the contract in order for that little time area to open up so you can manually add in the time. So again, pre-build, probably your best practice, but if you just create a generic empty pre-build, you can still throw that in and on a case-by-case basis, put in that time so that this asset labor planning report can start to fill out and help you all out. So those are the 4 main reports that get utilized within Maintenance Planner. Again, the other ones that were there, feel free to go into your environment, click on those reports, get a sense of what they do and whether or not they may help you all. And that will wrap up our webinar on Simpro's Asset Maintenance Planner. To review, in this webinar, we covered Maintenance Planner configuration. That's from system setup components to the pre-builds to contracts and even creating the asset templates in order to create the actual assets that the Maintenance Planner truly revolves around. We covered Maintenance Planner workflow that entailed not only creating jobs and the technician's workflow, but also the job closeout process and even billing as it occurs within Maintenance Planner. We also covered the Maintenance Planner reports. So those are the 7 reports that come along with it, diving into 3 or 4 of them a little bit more in depth. Hopefully you learned a lot, but should you need it, we do have further resources available. Our Learning Toolbox has a curated foundational course on Simpro Maintenance Planner. There's an entire tree of articles in our help guide about Maintenance Planner. We also have live recurring 2-part workshop series run by our Simpro staff. You can get the full schedule and register for those and the many other free live workshops that we run at workshops.simprogroup.com. As always, our help desk is also available to address any questions, concerns, comments, or even lead you into the right direction to get the answers you are looking for. Thank you and have a wonderful day.